I recently watched Yorgos Lanthimos Bugonia, and one thing immediately stood out to me. Parts of the film appear to be shot wide open with a very shallow depth of field. So it got me thinking, what role does depth of field actually play in storytelling? How does depth of field affect the way an audience experiences a scene? What do we gain or lose when we choose to isolate the subject from their environment? Well, today I want to explore what Bugonia can teach us about depth of field and how we can apply those lessons to our own work in corporate filmmaking, documentaries, and even event videography. Let's dive right in. Bugonia is a dark comedy directed by Yorgos Lanthimos and captured by cinematographer Robbie Ryan. The film stars Emma Stone alongside Jesse Plemons. Shallow depth of field has long been associated with professional cinematography. It's one of the visual characteristics that separate high-end production from amateur work. I didn't find any information online where either the director or the cinematographer discussed the intentional use of shallow depth of field. But in several interviews, Ryan talks about the team's desire to shoot in VistaVision, which is an old format that provides a larger image area and naturally produces a shallower depth of field than traditional 35mm film.
You just got twice as much negative all of a sudden, so essentially there's a bit more shallow depth because it's a bigger negative.
He also discusses wanting to shoot wide open and the importance of finding lenses that would remain sharp when shot at maximum aperture. The combination of VistaVision, wide open lenses, and deliberate framing choices created an extremely shallow depth of field, causing backgrounds to completely fall away in many shots and isolating subjects from the world around them, something we don't often see from Hollywood. Watching the film reminded me of my own experience when I first purchased my CineLens. It has a maximum aperture of 1.3, and I was very excited because it meant that now I could just throw any background out of focus very easily, and I use it as much as I could. I try to shoot as shallow as possible. It allowed me the possibility of isolating my subject from the background or removing any distraction. It just felt very professional to me. So I was very surprised when I started hearing from other directors of photography, either online or at workshops that I attended, where they talked about the fact that they almost never shot wide open. And some of it was because of technical difficulties of wanting to make sure the subject was always in focus. Others argue that once the depth of field becomes too shallow, the environment stops contributing to the story. At first, I struggled to really understand that perspective. After all, if shallow depth of field looks good, why wouldn't you use it as much as possible? Why would you buy a lens that can actually shoot at 1.3 if you're just going to shoot at T4? I also had the opportunity to work with some very high-end anamorphic lenses, and I discovered that some of these lenses became noticeably softer at their widest aperture. I never experienced lenses that could actually perform differently at different aperture. You were unable to focus properly. Everything stayed kind of soft around them. So for the first time, I began to understand why some cinematographers choose to stop down. It wasn't simply about gaining more depth of field. Sometimes it was just about limitation. The equipment simply did not perform at its best when wide open, even on very high-end lenses. And that's why Robbie Ryan discusses the challenge of finding the right lenses that not only would give them the look they wanted, but also the performance when fully open.
It was kind of like trying to find the best range of lenses that were working at a sharp level on an open aperture. Everything's quite portraiture and intimate, and I think that's such a great, clever idea to choose a format that may be regarded as a landscape, big VistaVision kind of format, but use it with an intimacy of a basement and film it as a portrait kind of format.
What's fascinating about Bugonia is that it appears to embrace extremely shallow depth of field in some scenes while maintaining much deeper focus in others. And I didn't find a particular clear pattern to it. The film uses extremely shallow depth of field in the opening sequence, in several close-up shots in the basement, inside the corporate office, and even in some scene within Michelle's home. What I found interesting is how those images affect the viewer's experience. By allowing the background to completely fall away, the audience is encouraged to focus almost entirely on the character. Small facial expressions become more important and glance feels intense. A stare can become uncomfortable. The audience spend less time exploring the environment and more time studying the person. The result is a sense of intimacy and connection that can be difficult to achieve when the eye is free to wander around the frame. For me, in my line of corporate filmmaking work, shooting wide open gave me the ability to make a boring room look better, hide messy background or spaces that are not very attractive, hide sensitive information, showcase specific things like an award, for example. Shooting wide open also gives me more flexibility in an environment where I don't have full control. So for example, people walking in and out in the background that are not part of the scene, I don't have to really worry about it because they're typically very blurry and you can't really identify who they are. But over time, something started to change. The more I filmed interviews, documentaries, and corporate stories, the more I realized that I wasn't just blurring distractions. Sometimes I was actually blurring valuable information. The office that helped explain who someone was, the manufacturing floor that demonstrated what a company actually did, the relationship between people sharing the frame. These environments communicate information long before a subject ever says a word. They can convey success, warmth, professionalism, innovation, craftsmanship, or care. If the environment helps tell the story, removing it comes at a cost. In the movie, Emma Stone's character, Michelle, is a highly successful, powerful CEO. And the office, the corporate office that she operated in is very much representative of her position. And if they would have shot it very shallow and remove all that information from the viewers, if us as viewers did not experience the environment of that office, it would have taken away a sense of accomplishment, the sense of power that her character has. It's pretty obvious and pretty easy to understand that in narrative, in feature film, set design plays a huge factor in the storytelling. It's harder to understand that environment that we operate in corporate films or in documentaries or even in event videography also plays a role in the storytelling. And we need to start looking at those environments as sets, as our production design, and figure out if that environment is part of the story, or better yet, how that environment is part of the story. What does it communicate? Is it something valuable? Or is it at a detriment to the story? Should we eliminate the background or should we embrace it to give our viewer a better context, more information that's valuable to the story that we're telling? More often than not, I feel like in the world of corporate filmmaking, we work in environments that are just not that pleasing. And so using a shallow depth of field might be a great technique to remove some of that boringness. Like if you're shooting inside of a really plain conference room, blurring the background, could be a great way to just make the image feel very professional and good looking when in fact you're in an environment that's just not that interesting. The same idea applies to people. With a deeper depth of field, we can show relationship rather than simply isolating individuals. A mentor and a student, an advisor and a client, a doctor and a patient, a CEO and an employee. Sometimes the story isn't the person, sometimes the story is the connection between the people. Think about a financial advisor sitting across from a client. If I isolate the advisor with a very shallow depth of field, the story becomes about the advisor. But if I allow both people to exist within the frame, now the story becomes about trust, communication, and the relationship they're building together. By keeping both subjects visible and present within the frame, we allow the audience to observe those relationships and better understand the story being told. Today, I still prefer a pretty shallow depth of field, but I also try to give the audience enough information to understand the world surrounding the subject. In an era where so many cinematographers advocate for stopping down, I have found it refreshing to see a major feature film fully embrace shallow depth of field. Not because shallow depth of field is inherently better, but because it reminded me that every creative choice comes with strength and weaknesses. There are moments where isolating a character creates a powerful emotional connection, just as there are moments where the environment itself becomes an important part of the story. One of the reasons I found this conversation so interesting is that aperture is often taught as an exposure control tool. We open up when we need more light, we stop down when we have too much. But aperture, shutter speed, and ISO to me are a lot more than just exposure tool. They're creative tools. As filmmakers, our goal shouldn't be to shoot at f2.8, f4, or even f11 because that's what the light allows. Our goal should be to decide what we want the image to communicate and then use the tools available to create it. That's what intentional filmmaking looks like. So the next time you're choosing an aperture, don't just ask yourself if the exposure is correct. Ask yourself how much of the story you want your audience to see. Because depth of field isn't just about making a background blurry. It's about deciding what information belongs in the frame. If you found this video useful, make sure you like and subscribe to the channel for more cinematography tips and storytelling techniques to help you become a more intentional filmmaker. And if you'd like to learn more about camera settings and how they impact the images you create, check out my online course, Essential Camera Settings. Thanks for watching and happy filming.